So I just want to say hello and welcome to our webinar on how to survive cold water swimming. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Michael Morris, founder of Chill, and we do open water courses for people with anxiety and depression. We've got people today from Australia. We've got people today from Seattle, which is just fantastic. And here we are mainly in North Devon, although Heather Massey, who'll be joining us in a bit, she's from Portsmouth. So before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is live on Zoom. We've got 100 people joining us there and many more via our YouTube live stream. It will be recorded and a copy will be available to view on the Active Devon website and the Active Devon YouTube channel. For those of you joining us on Zoom, use the chat box function to comment and ask questions. Please let us know who the question is directed to, and we will have a question and answer session at the end. Okay? For those of you joining on YouTube, again, you can do the same. You can ask some questions, and if we don't get to them, we will reply to them after the seminar, after the webinar. So the presentation will last about 1 hour with a Q&A afterwards. This webinar is brought to you by Chill Therapy CIC and sponsored by Active Devon and Connecting Actively to Nature. The mental and physical benefits of physical activity and spending time in nature are well known. And our vision is that everyone in Devon has the opportunity and the confidence to be naturally active in order to improve their health and well-being. So that's what Active Devon are about. And we're one of those activities they do, which is just fantastic. And they help us find, they give us the money to put on the courses, and they've been fantastic at supporting us. So thank you very much indeed, Active Devon. Please visit activedevon.org for more information on getting and staying active, including campaigns, programs, blogs, videos, insights, and inspiration. Tonight, we're also being supported by RNLI, and we do have a real live RNLI man with us who we'll be speaking to later, and also the Coast Guards as well. So they've been fantastic at supporting us, and obviously we all want everyone to be safe in the water, and that's what it's all about. I'm just going to play you a 1-minute little clip on what Chill is all about, and then after that we will start on the webinar. So here we go. Theoretically. So there we are. That's what we do at Chill, get people who are feeling anxious and depressed into the water, and it really does work. Open water swimming. During lockdown, people are saying 2 million people are now doing it. We all know the benefits. There are a lot of them, and that's what we're looking into. We're doing trials and everything, but it can be dangerous. And my first advice is, if you're not swimming at the moment, then don't start until it's warmer. So, you know, it's bloody cold out there. It's, I don't know, 6 degrees in the water, 5 degrees. And then in river, that's in the sea. And then in the rivers, it could be 2 degrees, 3 degrees, very, very cold, and you will come unstuck very, very quickly. So the best thing to do is start in the summer and then keep on going all the way through the winter. And then you can go through the winter, which is fantastic, but don't start now. So our swimming is basically for people in sort of sea, although much of what we do will translate into lakes. And we're also concentrating on those people who are not wearing wetsuits. So we've broken it into 4 areas this evening. There's Dr. Heather Massey talking on the physiological aspects of what's happening to the body, including after drop, what happens to the tissues, what happens to the muscles. Then myself, I'm going to talk about the kit needed and the procedure. Jasmine Bennett's going to talk about the theory of riptides, waves, and what to look out for. And Jack Hutchins, as I said, our RNLI man, is going to talk to us about hands-on experience at Croy Beach, which is a pretty vicious beach, to tell you the truth. And he's going to do some anecdotal stories, etc. And then we're going to go to some questions, which you can put to the panel. And as I say, you can tap them in now and then say who you want to answer the question. And Tom Mack from Active Devon is our technical man who's going to do that. And Neil Blackburn, I believe, is on YouTube. So even if you're on YouTube, as I say, you can put some questions in. So Dr. Heather Massey. She's a researcher at the Extreme Environments Laboratory at the University of Portsmouth and a senior lecturer. Next year, she's heading up the research of a nationwide trial into how effective cold water immersion is in the treatment of anxiety and depression from courses put on by Chill. She's had many papers and articles published on cold water immersion and is one of the most knowledgeable people in this area of research. On July the 9th, 2019, she completed a channel swim in 16 hours and 1 minute, which is cool unless she wanted to do it under 16 hours. Don't know, you'll have to ask her. But wow, she certainly put her money where her mouth is. Over to you, Dr. Heather Massey.
Thank you very much, Mike. And I'm just going to start my slides, if that's okay. And what we're going to be talking about in this segment is really the question I get asked most is, what happens to me when I go into cold water? And I'm going to give you some small amount of information that will hopefully make you aware of what's going on when you go into cold water so that you can make appropriate decisions around that. So next slide, please, Tom. Now, I work in the Extreme Environments Laboratory, as Mike pointed out, and this is my place of work. In our swimming flume, we can alter the water temperature and also the environmental conditions. Next slide, please there, Tom. Now, I may be talking today, but I work in quite a large team and with a large number of people. And the work I'm going to be primarily talking about today are 2 of the people in these slides. And that's Professor Mike Tipton and also Surgeon Rear Admiral Frank Golden. And they are pictured on the top middle of the screen and also on the extreme left of your screen as you see it. So we're going to be talking about what happens to the body. Next slide, please there, Tom. So when we go into cold water, there's really 4 main stages of being in cold water. And the first is that initial response when you go into cold water, which we call the cold shock response. And it's about cooling the skin, which results in an inspiratory gasp and uncontrolled breathing, followed by an increase in work to the heart and an increase in blood pressure. Now, the next tissue to cool is that of the superficial nerves and muscles as well, and that can result in something called swim failure, and basically it's an incapacitating response. The next tissue to cool are then the deep body, and it's physically impossible to cool the deep body within 10-15 minutes of being immersed in cold water. But most people think the journey about cold water immersion or swimming is over once they've got out of the water. But we also experience a post-swim period where we continue to cool. We don't immediately rewarm once we've been in the cold water. Now, initially, it was originally thought that the most dangerous parts of being in cold water were those responses that were longer term, so the hypothermia or low deep body temperature responses. But we now know that actually the greatest risk occurs during the initial phase of immersion in cold water, so that cold shock response and also that short-term water immersion. So let's have a look at the cold shock response to start with. So next slide, please there, Tom. So what we have is our immersion in cold water is it lasts for about 60 to 90 seconds, less so if you're regularly immersed or swim in cold water, and peaks after about 30 seconds. Now, it depends on the surface area exposed. So if you put a large surface area of the body into the water, you'll get a very big cold shock response, whereas smaller surface areas will obviously have shorter responses. Now, the maximum response tends to occur between water temperatures of about 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. If we go into water temperatures lower than this, what we tend to see is a longer duration of cold shock response and also stimulation of the pain receptors as well in the skin. If we have a look at the table on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see that we have, where we're looking at the heart rate, breathing frequency, and the amount of air that we breathe in. Now, initially, before we go into water, we can see we have a heart rate of about 90 beats a minute, breathing at 12 breaths a minute, and about a volume breathed of around 16 litres. Now, once we go into the cold water, remember, we're still very stationary, not doing anything. We see a big increase in the heart rate, breathing frequency, and the volume breathed. And we see that large breathing volume in the first minute. That's enough, is way more than enough to result in the 1.5 litres of water, seawater, that it can take to drown. Now, we know that much less water is needed to initiate that drowning process. But in the first minute, we're shifting over 100 litres of air, and that can be a real threat. So if you have a wave break over your face or you dive in and your airway is still submerged below the surface of the water and you take that uncontrollable gasp, you're going to aspirate, so breathe in quite a large volume of water, leading to the lethal dose of water for drowning. So the advice here is don't jump in or dive in, go in gradually and slowly so that you can overcome that cold shock response very gradually in order to be able to swim. Next slide there, please, Tom. So once we've cooled the skin and we've got over the cold shock response, the next tissues to cool are those of the superficial nerves and muscles. And in this picture and these pictures here, what you'll see is a picture, if you're an old crusty like myself, is a female Olympic athlete, Sharon Davis, who won an Olympic medal in the 1980 Olympic Games. So an exceptional swimmer. Yet we managed within our work, managed to fatigue her, make her tired with only 10 minutes of swimming. The reason for that is, one, she's in very cold water. She's in 10-degree water. And that led to her resulting in her from swimming very flat on the surface of the water at the start of that swim. And gradually you can see in the series of pictures, her legs start to drop to the point where she's virtually vertical in the water and results in something called ladder climbing, where she's just trying to keep her airway above the surface of the water and unable to make forward progress. So if we can do that in an Olympic athlete, we can do it. It must be a very incapacitating response. And it's primarily due to cooling of the nerves, cooling of the muscles, which reduces the strength and coordination that we have to swim. And it also causes an earlier onset of fatigue. So don't overestimate your ability to swim in cold water. You won't be as good a swimmer in cold water as you are in a pool. Next slide there, please, Tom. Okay, so we've cooled the skin, we've cooled the superficial muscles, and now we're cooling the deep body. And as you can see from this slide, there's a large number of factors that influence the rate at which our deep body will cool. And the primary two factors are those in red. So the amount of exercise that we can perform, including the amount of heat we can produce, and the amount of insulation that we have, whether that's internal or external. So whether that's body fat and muscle, or whether that's a wetsuit. Now, obviously, water temperature has a big impact, so we cool more rapidly in colder water than in warmer water. And there's lots of other factors here displayed on the screen that I don't have time to go through during this session, but I'm happy to answer questions on later if you have any. Next slide there, please, Tom. So we've now come out of the water and we're going to continue to cool. And I've just put this slide on here, which is of a study that we undertook with 12 volunteers who completed 3 swims of 40 minutes duration in 15-degree water, just wearing a swimming costume. And you see from the slide on the left-hand side that the deep body temperature, we used a rectal thermometer for this particular study, continues to cool during the swim. And we see that cooling effect continues after they've been swimming in the cold water. Now, the reason for that is purely because of the conductive nature of cooling and the tissues that we're measuring to measure deep body temperature. You'll also see that we're looking at 3 different rewarming methods during that rewarming process. Now, we particularly, because of this continued cooling, we don't encourage people to perform safety critical tasks during that initial rewarming period, while the deep body temperature is continuing to fall. We know that you may get out of the water completely fine, but may become, your mental faculties and also your physical capability may decline during that rewarming phase. So you might be a danger to yourself, but also to others as well. You'll also notice that we used a rewarming bath to rewarm our volunteers in one condition. Now, we normally guard against rapid rewarming using hot baths or showers, particularly if you overstay your welcome in cold water and reduce your deep body temperature. But it's a different matter if you're only in the water for 5 or 10 minutes and you're unlikely to reduce the deep body temperature. And so actually it feels quite nice to rewarm just the skin and it aids your comfort as well. So next slide there, please, Tom. Now, the best kept secret in swimming in cold water is something called non-freezing cold injury. And it's something that we don't know a huge amount about. But the picture we have here on the left-hand side is a picture of an ice swimmer who has clearly started to develop a non-freezing cold injury. And this is one of the first stages of non-freezing cold injury, where the fingers and hands are very swollen and very painful. Now, as I said, we don't know a huge amount about non-freezing cold injury, but we think it might be related to Raynaud's, which we see on the right-hand side, which is causes a vasospasm in the blood supply to the fingers and toes. The little we know about it is that that non-freezing cold injury may be similar to that Raynaud's process. And in people with Raynaud's, females tend to have 2 to 9 times more likelihood of having a Raynaud's condition than males would. Now, if we come back to non-freezing cold injuries, now one of the reasons where we don't have that much information is that lots of the work has been undertaken in military populations, which are heavily skewed towards a male cohort. And so there's very few females that have actually been assessed for non-freezing cold injury. The little we do know about non-freezing cold injury is we think it may be related to neural or vascular changes that occur, but we're unclear what dose of cold or the duration of cold will result in a non-freezing cold injury. And we do suspect that that dose of cold will differ between different people. Next slide there, please, Tom. Okay, so that's a brief summary of what I've talked about today. And on the left-hand side in those boxes there, details some of the potential problems of going into cold water. And on the right-hand side, some of the mitigations. Now, I'm not going to go through these in detail because I know that I'm going to give my slides to Tom and Active Devon so that they can send them out to you so you can have a look at these in more detail. But I'd just like to finish, so next slide, Tom, on a few tips and hints and tips that will all help us to have a better swim when we do go swimming. So the first thing is know how you're going to get out before you get in. You're at your strongest when you go into cold water. Obviously, as you cool, you're going to, your strength will reduce. And so if you're at full strength, it's going to be tough getting in the water. It's going to be more difficult when you get out. So know how you're going to get out before you get in. Swim with others. It sounds simple, but it's really important that you look after each other, and problems can be allayed by just swimming with each other. However, don't rely on the swimmer to know how cold they are. We know from experience of dealing with lots of swimmers that actually the more acclimatized the swimmer is, the less well they're able to indicate how cold they are. Also, wear bright coloured hats or toques. It makes you more easily seen in the water, both in terms of the users and also people on the land. And finally, dry and dressed as quickly as you can post your swim. We're all guilty of standing there in our swim costumes, still wet, surveying where we swim and enjoying that moment. However, the period for a reason is because whilst your skin is still wet, you will be evaporating water from the surface of the skin, and that will help to contribute to further cooling. So whilst you still have that continued cooling profile, you also have this evaporative cooling happening as well. So you can reduce that opportunity for further cooling by drying and dressing as quickly as possible. Now, I could talk about this for ages, and I'm aware that I'm really short on time. So I'm going to hand back to Mike and say thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Heather. That was really interesting. I didn't like the sudden death bit on one of those things, but anyway, we're going to avoid sudden death here. It's really bad for business. But I mean, that is just really, really interesting, and a lot of what Heather has just said just now, I'm going to sort of reiterate and cover as well, and probably in a little bit greater depth. So yeah, really, really great. So we're going to do preparation now. This is before you leave to go for your swim. Make sure you've eaten. It's fantastic. We went swimming with a lady about 3 weeks ago, and she was terribly faint, and she hadn't had breakfast. And I said, next time, have breakfast, because that's a good thing to do. Check conditions, tide times, height of tide, air temperature, and chill factor. Chill factor, really, really important. The Exmoor swims in September. It's in Wimberble Lake in Exmoor, quite high. The actual temperature of the water is 16 degrees, but because the air temperature is so chilly and you're on the surface of it, you will cool down very quickly. So if it is very, very chilly, like it was last week, again, give it a miss. If you're worried, just don't go. Know your locality, RIPS, which obviously we're going to discuss later, best where to go in, best where to get out, and local knowledge, really important. So you can go and ask, for instance, if there are, if the RNLI guys are on the beach, go and ask them, where are the RIPS here? If you go to anywhere, there's normally other people swimming. Go and ask them, is this a safe time? There'll always be a good time to go on your local beach. It might be high tide, might be low tide. Croyd, for instance, in North Devon, where we are, is better to go in, at one time, for instance, higher tide. Putsborough, lower tide. So just basically know your beach and be prepared, and ask people. Go with a buddy. Heather Massey said that, very, very important. Don't go in alone. If for any reason you do go in alone, then tell someone that you're going in, so then you will be missed. Check mobile phone coverage. It's really important. I mean, we do risk assessments like this all the time, and oh gosh, we want to phone 999 and ask for coast guards. No, we can't. There's no signal. For instance, at Putsborough, you can't. You'll have to run up to the top and make the call there. So just be very, very aware of your whole situation before you actually take to the water. Know where your nearest defib is. In Putsborough, there's one in the office where you pay to get in. Croyd, I believe there's one in Ruda. There's one in Croyd Village Hall. So just be aware before you go in. It's like a risk assessment, but you know, just be aware before you go in. And then finally, do a checklist before you leave of your kit. I don't know how many people turn up, so I haven't got my my changing robe. I've forgotten it, you know. So just make sure you've got everything. So the kit, well, a waterproof changing robe. You know, we're not going to go in which one's better, whatever. There's many out there, dry robe, moon wraps, whatever. They've all got their pros and cons, but they're all waterproof. They will keep you warm. If you just use a towel, it'll be a disaster. It really will be a disaster. So use one of your changing robes. And a clever little technique this time of the year, wear a towel robe underneath. So you've got a toweling type robe, and then you've got your changing robe. You know, it works really, really well because you sort of dry off, and then you've got the extra thickness of the other coat. So it's really worthwhile to get that. Woolly hat, imperative. Probably not to wear in the water, certainly not in North Devon, but you know, you've got the hat hood, but have the hat, and as we know, we lose a lot of temperature there through your hat, through your head. Get a bucket for your gear. It's imperative this time of the year for you to be able to access your gear quickly on exit from the water to avoid after drop, and we've been talking about, and Heather covered that. A surf bucket will allow you to leave your kit near the water's edge. How about a hot water bottle? And you put a little trick that we do is you put your hot water bottle and you place that in an insulated bag with your clothes. And so when you're drying, you put your clothes back on, bang, you are, you know, really toasty, which is obviously great. Hot drink, I think is essential. I know some people say it cool you down or whatever, but you're holding the hot drink, it makes you feel good. Yes, I think a hot drink is essential. Snack, again, raising the sugar levels up because you will have depleted quite a lot of energy in doing what you've done. Again, Heather, you know, this is so important. Heather mentioned this, brightly colored swim hat. You have to be seen in the water, otherwise Jack will not be able to get you. So make sure you wear a brightly colored swim hat. So there are other things. There are neoprene swim hats as well. You can wear that, but make sure you are seen. Booters and gloves. You know, at this time of the year, even though you are you know, going in without a wetsuit on, there's no shame in wearing booters and gloves. And it's so cold. If you know you start to freeze, you can't walk properly. Booters and gloves essential at this time of the year. Swimsuits, there are loads out there, so some will reduce heat loss. You could try a tri-suit, you could wear a shorty or a half wetsuit, you know, again, whatever you're comfortable with. You know, I mean, basically everyone's all shapes and sizes. Some people cool down a lot quicker than others. Goggles, not essential to tell you the truth. I don't really bother with them, but if you go for a long swim, quite nice. Tow float, if we're going into play in the water, we don't really use them, but if you're going on a long swim, they're great. And obviously you can put your phone in there, you can put a snack in there. Don't quite know whether you're going to stop and have a snack, but whatever. But tow float, very, very, you know, very, very good, although I don't really use it. Right, procedure. Be aware of where your ingress and egress points are, where you get in and get out, and check where your mobile phone is. And also make sure your buddy is aware if you have an inhaler or vice versa. So you're just, it's like a buddy system when you go scuba diving, you know, so you know their issues. And also, I think Heather said this as well, is they don't know, people don't know. When they've got hypothermia, they won't know. They become very sort of confused. So just watch out for that and be aware of your buddy. And also, as I say, if they've got an inhaler, make sure that you know where it is. Warm up before you go in, essential. Place a bucket near the water line, but be aware where the tide is coming in or out, pretty obvious. Wait until your swim buddy is ready, only then take off your waterproof changing robe. Keep it zipped. So basically take it all the way down, but keep it zipped up and then step out of it. because when you get out and you've got freezing hands, you won't be able to zip it back up. So you won't have to, because it's already zipped. Going gradually, Heather again covered this. Acclimatize as you go, and people take different times to acclimatize. So wash your legs, wash your face, wash your arms, slow it down. And most importantly, we've seen this, remember to breathe. Is probably, if you forget everything, remember to breathe. Really, really, really important. In extreme cold, don't go too far out. Swim parallel. So go out a little bit. You're still in your depth, and turn right. If it's Puxborough, for instance, you can carry on for ages. And then if you suddenly can't move your hands anymore because you've been in there too long, which would then be silly, then you can just hop out and you've never got out of your depth. Get out gradually and before you feel cold. So the feel good, and we talked about that, Heather talked about this as well. You feel brilliant. Get out then. You know, don't wait until you're feeling cold before you get out. Sometimes you can feel lightheaded, so stand up gradually and wait a few moments. Heather, I love that, called, I didn't know it was called that, the honeymoon period. So when you get out, you have a honeymoon period. You feel on top of the world. You have just conquered the world. You've been up Everest, and also you're buzzing. It's just fantastic how you feel. The after drop, as we've seen on that graph that Heather just mentioned, it will get you. You need to not muck around, and you need to put on your stuff very, very quickly. Get back to the car, put the engine on, drink, snack, check on your buddy, and also check for signs of confusion, blue lips, etc. For instance, I think about a month ago, a lady drove off with her door open. We caught it. So make sure that your buddy is good and happy before you leave. And then enjoy. It all seems really desperately serious, doesn't it? But I mean, if you do all this stuff and you do what was done, then there is no problem. So obviously make sure you have a good time. Right, that's me done. I am now going to pass you over to Jasmine Bennett, who is a lifeguard. She is a chill coach. She is a coordinator at the Wave Project, and she is mainly to be found in the water surfing. And she's going to talk about rips and tides and swell. Over to you, Jasmine.
Thanks, Mike. As Mike's just said, I'm going to be mainly talking through tides, rip currents and swell. So we'll just be going into a little bit more detail about each of those things. These aren't sort of definites that are going to be the same, exactly the same for where I am as where I've used factors to look at and consider, especially if you're going to a new spot, so that you can, as Mike's mentioned, create a bit of a risk assessment for yourself so that you're aware of the dangers and minimizing them as much as possible. So first of all, we'll look at tides, as you can hopefully see on the slide there. A tide is obviously just the rise and fall of the water, which is in relationship with the lunar cycles around us. Here in North Devon, I'm in Croyd, and across a lot of the UK, we have 2 high tides and 2 low tides roughly per 24-hour day. So that means 6 hours between a high tide and the following low tide, and approximately 12.5 hours between the high and then the next high tide. So you'll notice it doesn't quite add up to that 24 hours exactly. Next slide, please, Tom. So what that means is that at sometimes throughout the month, we have fluctuation in the size and height of the tide. So the difference between the low tide and the high tide mark in height in meters differs throughout the month. So we have spring tides, as you can see in the slide here, when the gravitational force of not only the moon but also the sun is aligned with the earth. That gives us a spring tide, and that happens usually twice a month. The opposite end of the scale for that is a neap tide. So a spring tide has the highest high tide and the lowest low tide. Neap is the opposite, with the smaller gap. It's got sort of not such a high tide and not such a low tide, if that makes any sense at all. So in terms of the tides, I would recommend, if you haven't got one already, grabbing yourself a little yellow book or heading on to what Magic Seaweed or any of the other forecast and prediction websites that have the tide times on them. These are super helpful because they have predictions for the entire year of the tide times, high and low, throughout the entire year. They've also got, I'm not sure how well you can see, but they've also got the height in meters. So you are able to see that difference whether you're at a spring tide, a neap tide, or anywhere in between. And that's obviously going to affect how much water is moving throughout the session whilst you're in the water, and just throughout that day, or maybe even that week. A reason that it's really helpful to be aware of the tide, apart from obviously that huge volume of water moving in and out, is that also if you're going to a new spot, low tide gives you the opportunity to go and seek any dangers that might be there, recognize them, and just clock them before you go swimming. So if I'm going somewhere new, I'll go and see the place at low tide so that I've got a sense of whether there are any hidden rocks that I might not know about at high tide, and then probably wait to swim at a higher tide quite often. In terms of rips, oh, could I have the next slide, please, Tom? Which is the next thing that I'm going to be talking about. First of all, just to explain that a rip is simply a body of water that's moving back out to sea and finding its own level. I'm based in North Devon, and we have a great deal of swell, so that means a great deal of waves coming in all the time, bringing a great volume of water in, and that water's all got to escape back out somehow. So what rips do is they find the easiest channel. They'll find the lowest point and the easiest channel for that water to escape back out to sea. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is a quick picture at low tide of Croyd, which is my local beach. And as you can probably see, some areas are slightly lower, and that means that even at low tide, they're still a bit wet. And some areas are slightly higher, and they're a little bit more exposed and a little bit drier in this picture. So what that means is that those areas, as the tide comes up, which are lower, which are sort of a little bit lower down than the sandbank areas that you can sort of see here, even though it's minimal, those areas are areas that might be prone to the water rushing out a bit faster in what we might recognize as a rip current. Next slide, please. I should also say it's not just on beaches that we have rip currents. Also, around a coastal area might create a rip. So maybe a pier, or Saunton Beach, if anyone's ever been there, is a really good example, that by the rocks on the right hand side of the beach, there's almost a constant rip running there. It's an area where there's a bit of a channel, and for me, if I'm going surfing, I would actually intentionally get in by the rip because I can use it to take me out to sea really quickly and easily. In terms of the anatomy of a rip next, you can see here on the picture where there's the red arrow. The main part of that red arrow would be the neck of the rip. So that's the main body of water that's moving out to sea. At the top of the arrow, that would be the head of the rip. And actually after that point, the energy of it is going to dissipate. So that water isn't going to keep running out to sea for miles and miles. It's only going to be a matter of meters. So it might be 25, 50, 100 or 200 meters. Essentially, you can see the end of the arrow there is pretty much where the waves have stopped breaking. So out back for anyone who's a surfer. So those rips don't go on for miles and miles is probably a key thing to recognise if you're not aware of that already. Either side of the rip as well, so to the left and right of the red arrow, and roughly where the waves are breaking, what you may also experience are feeder rips. So those are bodies of water that are moving towards the main part of the rip, towards the neck of the rip. So quite often when we're in with group with chill, we might water and feel the water pulling us one way or the other. Often that's going to be taking you towards a rip. In terms of identifying a rip, you can see in this picture here, there's a discoloration of the water. So the water itself is a slightly darker colour than the water either side of it. You can see that there's waves breaking either side, but not in the area where there's a rip. And this is a really important one because often for an inexperienced swimmer, actually the rip can look like the safest spot. It can look like the calmest and perhaps the easiest to swim in, but that's not always the case. And especially if you feel unconfident out of your depth, if you do get into one of those calmer areas and it is a rip current, you can quite quickly find yourself out of your depth. Another way that we can recognize a rip is sometimes the quality of the surface of the water might be different from the areas around it. So to me in this picture, I know it's quite zoomed out, it looks as if there's a smoother quality to the surface, the top surface of the water where the rip is, and either side there's a more of a quality of being uneven and a little bit kind of choppier either side, and that could be vice versa. So it might be that you have really smooth, calm surface water either side, and you have a choppy section that could be the rip itself. So there are quite a few different ways to identify a rip, and of course not each one of those necessarily means that it's a rip, but when you've got a few of those coming together, you've got quite a good chance that that is what's at play there. Somewhere like Croyd, which is my local beach, especially in the summer, you've got a good chance of spotting a couple of bodyboarders floating out in the rip as well. So that's another way to spot one. What to do if you get in a rip is my next little bit of information. So if I could have the next slide, please, Tom. So this should be a slide that we've already seen. As we've described, we've got the sandbanks on either side and the rip current that's a body of water taking you out to sea. The first and most important thing to do if you do find yourself in a rip and you realise that you're in a rip is to stay calm. It's really easy to panic, to become really worried about what's happening. And especially as Mike has mentioned, that can often sort of throw your breathing off as well, which only compounds the situation. So making sure that you stay is the first and most important thing. Next thing is to just raise the attention of somebody who might be able to help you if you can. So it could be a fist in the air if there's someone who you can spot nearby who might be able to help, or there's lifeguards on the beach, ideally. If you're within hearing distance of somebody, you could of course use your voice as well. Further than that, you can allow the rip to take you out to sea, and that's okay. So as we've already discussed, it doesn't go on and out to sea forever and ever. It will only be sort of a certain distance out past the waves. So after that point, you'll feel the energy of the rip sort of dissipate, and you can see the arrows at the top suggest escape to the right and to the left. So the thing to do then would be to swim parallel to the shore until you're confident that you're out of the energy of the rip, and then you can swim back in again. If you do find that you're a really strong swimmer and you feel confident to do so, if you're still in the neck of the rip, you could take a 45-degree angle in towards the shore, away from the rip, and escape that way. So that's some of the options of what to do. We'll talk about swell next. So could I have the next slide, please, Tom? We've had some pretty amazing swell hitting the North Devon coast in the last couple of weeks, especially with these kind of winter storms that we've had. Swell essentially are the waves that are coming in here in North Devon. They're coming all the way from across the Atlantic. Swell is created by wind over water over a long period of time. So there's a difference then between ground swell, which probably has happened hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from us, and low in those two things. Again, this is something that you can look at the forecast of on Magic Seaweed or other forecasting websites. Waves break obviously here on the beaches that we have because of the depth of the water. So waves usually break at a depth of about half of their height. So as they reach the coast, or maybe even a reef further out to sea, that's why we see waves breaking rather than just traveling through without breaking. So in terms of when we do have waves coming in, what we will experience at lots of beaches around here are sets and lulls, and they're quite important to know about. Sets are basically a group of waves, so that might be 3, 4, 5 waves coming in at a time, and then we have a lull, so that's a bit of a gap or a break between the waves. A good reason that it's useful to know about those is because it's really easy as you're arriving at your swim spot to, especially in bad conditions, get your head down because of the rain, not look too much, maybe just a quick glance as you pull up the car, think it's totally manageable because you've seen a lull, and then get into a pretty chunky set. So what I would suggest is making sure that you really watch the waves for a good few minutes so that you see both the set and the lull before you get in, so that you really know what you're dealing with on that particular day. Another thing that we can look at in terms of the forecasting is the swell period. So that's the gap between each wave, not the sets and the lulls as such, but this between each wave within a set. So the swell period could be really short. It could be 3 or 4 seconds. You've probably been in on a day like that where it feels like the waves are constantly coming over you. It's quite continuous, quite tiring. bigger swell period often would be 10 or 11 seconds, but actually these storm and winter swells that we've had recently, we've had swell periods of 19 or 20 seconds. So generally, the bigger the swell period, the more power each wave is bringing with it and the more volume of water it's shifting. So a bigger swell period probably means more dangerous conditions. So that's a really good one to watch. There are loads of different types of waves as well, here and all over the world, but probably the two that are most useful to know about for you guys who are open water swimming here in Devon. First of all would be shore break. So a shore break wave will happen at a steeply shelving beach. So whilst at Croydon Saunton, we've got quite shallow gradient of the beach, there might be areas that change throughout the winter. And there also might be other beaches that are more of a steeply shelving beach. As the wave breaks at half of its height, what that means is that we can have quite big swell coming in, coming up quite steeply and then breaking quite heavily onto quite shallow sand. Obviously, that's dangerous as you're entering and exiting the water, because it means you can go from standing in ankle deep to being at chest deep or more really, really quickly with those shore break swells and shore break waves. Another one that especially happens with winter storm swells are the surging waves. So again, with a big swell period with a lot of water moving, we might get a swell that really comes rushing up the beach very quickly because it's a surging wave with a great volume of water. So that's a good one to know about in terms of making sure that you leave your kit far enough up the beach, and also just again being aware that you can be knocked off your feet quite quickly by such a large volume of water. I think that's pretty much all from me. So if I can pass back to Mike, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. That was fantastic. And again, I've learnt more stuff today. I now want to ask Jack Hutchins to give his little talk. So he is an RNLI lifeguard. He's actually got 10 seasons behind him. So it's all happened probably on his watch. He's 3 times a winner of the Croydon Triathlon. So he's a pretty nifty swimmer. Head coach at Barnstable Pool. We train together. No, we don't. I've seen him once in the pool, and I do 1 length to his 2. So he's pretty fast. And he's going to tell us about Croydon Beach and what he gets up to, and some tips on how to stay safe. Over to you, Jack.
Thanks a lot, Mike, for that introduction and for having me on to speak today. There's some great insights there from those previous speakers. Really enjoyed listening. So I'm going to talk today about some of the incidents that I've responded to on the beach and some tips to avoid getting into trouble and how to get out of trouble if you do. So the vast majority of incidents in the sea are due to rip currents. It's very common for people arriving at the beach to see a quiet and more calm area and think that this is a great place to swim. However, as you've just learned from Jasmine, this could likely be a rip current. So I recall once watching the red and yellow flagged area on a busy day, and a woman decided to swim at the other end of the beach. She entered a rip current and was unable to get back to shore. After some time of swimming against the rip, luckily I spotted her, drove over, paddled out and brought her back to safety. She was really tired and was lucky that I got to her when I did. This is quite a typical event on the beach, and most of my time as a lifeguard is spent trying to keep people away from dangerous areas. And my first tip is an obvious one, and that is to stay away from rip currents. Could I have the next slide, please, Tom? So rip currents, however, don't conform to the textbook. And even with our best efforts, intentions, and preventative actions, people can end up out of their depth and being pulled away from shore in a current. There's been many times in my career when I've had the red and yellow flags on a safe bank all day, and suddenly a rip will open up off the edge of one of the flags, pulling many people who have been happily and safely enjoying the water out of their depth and leaving them unable to return to shore. One incident I can remember is when I was patrolling on the jet ski, and A male swimmer was in the red and yellow flags and was pulled across into a heavy impact zone of surf. He couldn't get to shore and was being knocked under by waves and couldn't keep his head above the water and was very close to losing consciousness. Often it takes the lifeguards several trips to ferry everyone back to shore in this kind of mass rescue type scenario using jet ski, boats and rescue boards, which brings me on to my second tip. If you find yourself in trouble, then use the international distress signal, which is a clenched fist above the head. Jasmine did mention this. The reason it's not an open hand is so I know you're not waving to your mate on the beach. And before you ask, yes, I have sprinted into the water to respond to people who have actually been trying to get the attention of their family and not the lifeguards. But using the clenched fist will ensure that I know you're asking for us. So as Jasmine showed in her section, water moves in circles as it's channeled across close to shore, out to sea, and then brought back in by the waves. So swimmers are occasionally taken out in a rip and around and closer to shore again, which brings me to my second tip, which is to relax and float. That was also, I'm echoing what Mike and Heather have said, stay calm. Those who struggle against the rip tire themselves out and cannot stay afloat, which is when we have our most serious rescues, and many people have been close to drowning. Many times I've pulled people out who are good swimmers, but have worked hard for a long time against the rip and become not so good swimmers. So look around you, try to work out what the water is doing and work with the water to get in, and don't get in a swimming race against the sea. Could I have the next slide, please? So as Jasmine mentioned earlier, you can see there is a channel on the beach here running parallel to the water's edge. So it's shown in her picture as well. Beyond that channel is a good bank and what would be a good place to swim. However, when the tide comes in over this channel, it's going to become a rip with water moving across and then out to sea. So this is why we lifeguards are constantly moving our safe areas to swim and surf. People assume that because the red and yellow flags were up in this spot during the day, that it's safe to leave at the end, it's safe to enter this same spot at the end of the day. So the next tip is to have a look at the beach on the way down to the water, and you can loosely predict where the rips are going to be as the tide pushes over them. But more importantly, if the tide's going out, then you need to be aware that it could drop into a hole or a rip. And you need to make sure you're continually assessing the conditions because they can change very quickly. Next slide, please. So you'll also need to consider if the tide is going to cause any water movement. So people think the tide creates a current in and out towards and away from the beach, and people will often swim out and attempt to return with the tide. So if you look on this map, you might assume that an incoming tide would push water from Baggy Point, where the blue arrow on the map is, across to Croyd Beach, which is the small beach in the center of the map. However, this is happening on a much larger scale. Next slide, please. So the incoming tide is actually moving water around and up the Bristol Channel. So on the west-facing coastline at Croyd and Woolacombe, where the water will be moving, in a northward direction on an incoming tide and not back to the beach. Where the water is channeled through a small path, i.e. at a point, it's going to be traveling even faster. So just last autumn, a man swam along the cliffs from Croyd. Could I have the previous slide actually, please, Tom, again? So just last autumn, a man was swimming along out towards Baggy Point from Croyd, and the tide was coming in and he was swept off the point and found himself many hundred meters offshore, off the point. He didn't tell the lifeguards what he was doing, and he had no chance of getting back. Luckily for him, someone was walking on the cliffs and saw him waving for help and called the Coast Guard, who then called us, and we were able to get him on the jet ski. He was very lucky that someone spotted him and that someone was walking. So my next tip is to be aware of what the tide is doing on a bigger scale and always stay close to shore and somewhere you can get out. Do I have the next slide, please? Sorry, next slide, thank you. So the main thing I want to get across is that there are so many variables that can catch you out. And if not cause you to drown, then may cause you to be in the water for a lot longer than you've planned, which can in turn reduce your body temperature and hamper your decision-making capabilities. So even if you think you can keep yourself safe under normal circumstances, can you do it with mild hypothermia? So as Mike and Heather said, don't push your limits, always leave something in reserve, or push to your limits, sorry, leave something in reserve. If there are lifeguards on the beach, then use the red and yellow flagged area. This will always be the safest place for you. And as Mike said, come and speak to us lifeguards. Tell us your plans. We'd always rather you told us, even if you're not planning to use our flags. We can keep an eye on you and we can advise you as to how best to stay safe. If there's no lifeguards on the beach, then never go in alone. Stay within your depth. And as I've said, and others have said, relax and float so you can think clearly on how best to survive. Thank you for listening. I'll pass back over to Mike.
Wow, well, yeah, that was exciting. Yeah, I think I remember that chap who was swimming at Baggy. So that's it. I mean, gosh, look at that. It's 6 o'clock. God, we're good. Dead on the button. So what we're really saying here is know your environment, be aware of the conditions, be prepared, have the right kit, and don't overdo it. If you do all those things, you will then survive. And just remember, the whole reason why we're doing this is it's fantastic out there. So we're not saying don't do it. What we're saying is just be prepared and be safe, because to swim in the sea is the most wonderful thing to do, no question. So what we're going to do now is have some questions. I don't know whether there are any questions or not, because we've got Tom from Active Devon, who is arranging or is seeing whether we've got the questions. So I'm going to see whether Tom is there, whether we've got any questions, and let's go on with the Q&As. Tom.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, we do have some questions. I'm going to remain as a voice in the mist because I've got you four panelists nicely arranged on my screen, which hopefully other people have too. We do have one or two questions, and I'll take a guess at who they might be for at the panel, but obviously do jump in if you think you've got something to add. So Julia asked quite early on about when to get out of the water. So once in the water and acclimatized and feeling okay, is that the time to get out? And I think, Heather, that's probably for you.
Yes. So yes, after you've got, particularly at the moment, when, I mean, the Solent is less than 5 degrees. North Devon might be slightly warmer, but not that much. So yeah, if once you've got over the cold shock response at the moment, it's then time to get out. You don't want to be spending any more than 5 to 10 minutes in the water at the moment. It's really very cold.
Brilliant. Thank you, Heather. We've got a few more questions just popped up as well, which is brilliant. Lots of thanks to the panel as well. Everyone's enjoyed the content that you guys have been talking about. A few people mentioned the What 3 Words app as something that's useful. I don't know if any of you panelists want to comment on people using What 3 Words in situations.
Yeah, I can do that. So as a Coast Guard, we have had people who have phoned in, dialed 999, given their What 3 Words, and we have then known exactly their location to the nearest meter. So it's absolutely fantastic. It's all free. You can download it, and we will be able to turn that into a grid reference that we can come and get you. So yes, really, really good.
Excellent. And someone mentioned that you can register your phone to text emergency services as well, which is not something I was aware of. I don't know if panelists are aware of that. No. Well, that was Maggie. So Maggie, maybe tap some more detail into the chat and we'll follow that one up. Yeah, some more comments about What 3 Words. Lots of great tips. Any chance of sharing them as a list afterwards? I think there's every chance of us putting something together. Obviously, we're going to share the video on our website and the YouTube channel. We had talked possibly about putting together a sort of FAQs sheet, which might be good, so we could address some of these points as frequently asked questions, and list them as a download next to the video. So that might be good. I've got another question here from Paula. As PWC users and sea swimmers, we are highly aware that swim hats are not enough to ensure you are seen by watercraft users, particularly if the water is choppy. A high-vis flag on your toe float is essential if you want to be really seen. Hats can just look like buoys. Okay, so it's not a question, but probably quite an important point just to raise. Another question from Jan. Is this information shared in schools? I think that was during, possibly during Jack's presentation. Some really life-saving information here that I will be sharing with my kids. Okay, so Jan's obviously a teacher. Jack, I don't know if you ever do anything in schools.
Yeah, pre-COVID, we were doing school talks. The RNLI locally were going into schools and doing delivering similar content. I'm not sure if it will resume. There's also been, I'm not sure if it will resume.
I guess that's something that schools could inquire about with the RNLI. And I know, Active Devon, we work with schools. So again, messaging, we could potentially play a role in getting that out there.
There is a charity that I'll get the details for it, and they do go into schools and they do give kids information about this. Jasmine, we wore their t-shirt the other day. Was it Sea Safe or something? But I'll get the details for you. So there is a group out there that does do this, actually.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mike. Okay, a few more questions. Kirsty's asked, could you share some of the positive health effects of cold water swimming? Who'd like to pick that up?
It's either me or Matt. I think Heather. Go for it, Heather.
I can have a go. Well, at the moment, what we know is from this. I'm talking from the scientific literature here. We know a lot about the potential harms that can occur because of being in cold water, and that's primarily because there's been more research in the area. There's been far less science undertaken on the potential benefits, but that doesn't mean there aren't any. And we're starting to gain quite a lot of opinion and anecdotal information of people that have had a positive impact from being able to access the water. And that can be for reasons of mental health, related to reductions in neural degeneration. It may well be related to inflammatory disorders as well. The level of evidence in terms of the science isn't there, but that doesn't mean that it's not having an impact on people's medical conditions. So what we need now, and this is a bit of a rallying cry, is to get that science completed so that we have a more equal balance between the science that being in cold water can do us harm, and we've talked about the potential harms it can cause, and also having a look at the areas in which we may have positive impact through cold water swimming. But at the moment, the level of evidence from the scientific point of view is more leaning towards the negatives, but we can reverse that with more science, more research.
Thanks, Heather. And I know for a fact there are plenty of people on this call who would be shouting about the positive impacts that getting into the cold water has had for them physically and mentally. We hear from lots of them all the time. Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we've got a few more questions. How are we doing for time? Yeah, we've got plenty of time. So Karen wanted to know duck diving tips for new swimmers. Who would like to pick that up? I know how difficult that can be with the surfboard, but Jasmine?
Yeah, I'll go for that one. there's just two things that spring to mind. There's probably lots more. Mike might want to add on a few more after me. First one, I think for me, is the idea of head down and bottom up, so that you really are getting that depth underneath the wave, making sure that you're getting deep enough underneath the water. And for me to visualize that, the amount of white water or broken wave that I can see above the surface, if I imagine that the wave has the same amount of energy underneath the surface as well, I know that I've got to get underneath that. So it's not that you're taking quite a shallow dive, because if you do that, you will be really diving straight into the energy and the main body of the wave. You want to be getting underneath the energy of it, where it's actually calm deeper down. So I think that thing of head down and bottom up, to get down that deep. Also just keeping a really nice streamlined position under the water once you're under there. Mike sometimes suggests grabbing on the sand if you're feeling that you can get down that deep, to grab the sand. It depends how far out you are, so that you really hold your position before popping up the other side of the wave. Mike, you might want to.
Jasmine, you just no, you've taught me everything you know, and that sounds absolutely everything I know, so that's perfect. That's great. I think we've covered that one.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Jasmine. Brilliant tips there. A couple more, Jasmine, that you might be able to answer. Is there a defibrillator at Saunton? Claire wanted to know. Any idea? No, not sure. Mike?
Yes. The last time I checked, there was a defibrillator at Saunton. I think it's behind the Surf Lifesaving Hut as you come out of the shop on the right-hand side. Yes.
That's exactly where it is. Brilliant. And Edwina asked, are rips all the same size? Do you get pulled out the same distance? Jasmine?
Jack might be able to answer more definitively, but I think no. I think it depends on the surf and swell, and the conditions that day, as well as what's going on underwater in terms of the sandbanks. Do you want to add to that, Jack?
No, yeah, I agree. It's varies massively based on a lot of factors that we've discussed today.
Cool. Okay. Thank you both. Richard is kind of asking, or suggesting and asking, is the best sea swim time high slack tide?
Should I answer that one? Depends on the beach. Massively depends on the beach, and it depends on whether you're talking about a spring or a neap tide, or where in between that you are. So as Mike mentioned earlier, for Putsborough, although it's mainly conditions wise manageable at nearly every time of tide, on a spring tide there actually isn't any beach left. You're literally walking down the slipway onto rocks, so it's totally unsafe on a spring high tide. But other beaches are going to be completely different from that. So it really just depends what site you're looking at, really, for that one.
Okay, thanks, Jasmine. Question for Heather from Claire. Can I mitigate the danger of cold water swimming with high blood pressure, which, and then in brackets, which is controlled effectively with meds?
Okay, so we know that the cold shock response will increase blood pressure and the load on the heart. I'm not a medical doctor, and you'll possibly need to seek advice from your GP regarding this, because they will need to know that you're undertaking an activity that would elevate your blood pressure. So it's worth having a chat with your GP.
Thanks, Heather. Question for me here. Are Active Devon involved in any campaigns for safer water quality in Devon? Frustrated with having to be concerned about sewage. Yeah, understandable. It's not a direct piece of our work, if you like, but I am connected to networks that have a more of an environmental focus. Active Devon, we're mainly about physical activity, but obviously these things are all linked. So it is something I could find out more about if you wanted to get in touch with me at Active Devon via the website. You can find my email. I'm happy to pick that up. Question from Emma. I'm currently using a wetsuit in the sea, which works nicely. Is it worth using some kind of long-sleeved swimsuit as opposed to a normal swimming costume once the water starts warming up? Do they keep you any warmer?
I can have a stab at this.
Yeah.
It's Emma, yeah?
Yeah.
So Emma, the wetsuit works because of the neoprene material that helps to trap a layer of water close to the surface of the skin that you then heat up. So if you have a very close fitting swimming costume that's made of a thinner material than neoprene, if it's the same material as a swimming costume, it's going to have the same thermal properties as a swimming costume will have. But if it's made of a neoprene material, then it will have the same capability as a wetsuit will have, but obviously you'll get colder limbs where they're not covered.
Thanks, Heather. Maggie, who mentioned registering your phone with the emergency services, has just clarified that. So apparently you text the word register to 999, receive a message reply with yes in a text message. I think more details on emergencysms.net. So that's not obviously a message that's coming out from the panel, but somebody suggested that. So do research that and take a look at that if you'd like to. Julia is saying Swim Safe program for children is run by Swim England and not the RNLI. Not sure if it's still running. Okay, just scrolling through the comments here. Duck diving, yeah, must try as soon as I can actually put my face in. Thanks, Heather. Right, Emma is asking, are there groups in North Devon that people can join? If so, what's the best way to find them? Well, I know there are several, and there are several on Facebook. I'm not quite sure the best way to find them. Mike, perhaps you might know some of those
yes,
groups?
I think you've got to be a lady to join the Healy Bay Merbabes. You've got Westwood Ho, there's one. There's one that in Saunton as well. I think what we could probably do is find them out, put them down, and then put that in as part of the fact sheet. But yes, there are quite a few around here.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. And actually, Neil Blackburn, who's our project officer in North Devon, was only saying to me today that he discovered one or two more. There's another one called Rappery, I think, in Ilfracombe, and some others. So we'll try and share those, and we'll definitely post them somewhere. Surfers Against Sewage have a water quality app. That's good info. So Maggie's saying that allows you to text 999 if you don't have a mobile signal. So that could be useful. Yeah, we've got some Merbabes on the call. Heel Bay Merbabes, Facebook social swim group. Could they go on the Active Devon activities finder? Yes, they can. But obviously we need those groups to add them themselves. So anyone that's part of one of those groups, you can get on our website, Active Devon, find the activity finder. You can register your group and post your activities on there. So even if it's informal, you could still post something on there about what you get up to and how people can get involved. The final message I've got on here at the moment is from Susan. Any tips, please, on engagement with and options when jet skis are being a nuisance / acting in a dangerous manner, especially when there are no obvious regulations in force in a location? Jack?
Yeah, it depends where you're at. You need to contact the local the people who manage or own the beach, because most beaches do have a kind of policy preventing power craft from coming within a certain distance of the beach. So they can enforce it, but then obviously some places they allow it. For example, at Croyd's, the beach owners don't allow it, so they will get involved or maybe ask us to communicate with people who are coming into the water's edge kind of area. And I think that's the same at Westwood Ho. But yeah, so it just comes down to who owns and manages the area.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Jack. I know living on the near the Exe estuary that they have zones for powered craft like that to stick to. Not that I'm an expert, but you certainly wouldn't want to be swimming through those areas when they're buzzing around. Someone has pointed out that you can obviously only meet in twos at the moment outdoors, which is worth remembering all of this is in the context of the pandemic, which we hope that situation is going to develop soon. And you can find more information on COVID regulations in terms of physical activity and outdoor groups meeting and so on the Active Devon website. As and when things change, we will post it up there. That is the end of the questions, unless any more pop up, and it's 6:17. Any final comments from the panel? If no other questions come in, then I guess we'll draw to a close.
Anyone? Okay, well, I'd just like to say thank you very much indeed, Active Devon, for allowing us to put this on, for hosting it. Thanks a lot to our panel, Heather, Jasmine, and Jack, and also Tom and Neil, who have been helping on the technical side. And just remember again that the whole of the webinar is available on the Active Devon website and also the YouTube channel. I think the software that they were talking about for surface-gated sewage is called Safer Seas, I think, and you can download that for free. And if there is a spillage, and I think they've now have to tell, the water authorities have to tell us that there has been, so you will get an update, a text alert. And also the charity that deals with education for kids is Above Water. So it just remains for us to say thank you very much indeed for coming along, and hopefully we will see you in the water soon, and stay safe.